Welcome to Farm Talk with Bolu. In this podcast series, we discuss agriculture, we share farmers' voices and agricultural trends to inspire young Africans to embrace farming. I am Bolu Agadibayo. So thank you so much for joining us in this new episode. We're going to be discussing something very, very interesting. It's the story of agriculture. I call it the beginning of agriculture. It's a story that I first heard when I was in junior secondary 1 from a Greek teacher, and I remember I think it was a copper then. And so this is the story of agriculture. So agriculture is believed to have dated back even before history. This period was called the Neolithic period, and I wouldn't want us to go into the intricacies of the different aspects, the medieval period and many other periods, and the growth of agriculture to what it is now. But I'll just give us the full a brief overview of agriculture generally. So modern men, the early humans, were called wanderers and gatherers because the early men were believed not to live, in houses or huts or probably big buildings, and they always had to move around the earth, wander around the earth in search of food to eat, in search of plants to eat, probably wild plants, and they always had to hunt the animals. So that was the lifestyle of the early men. And so probably a day came, this early man, after probably eating some fruit he had plucked from a tree, and spat the seeds down, and probably just one day noticed that, look, I passed this same place before, and this seed I threw on the floor is beginning to grow into a plant, because probably they never knew how the trees came to be. They just met everything there, met the trees, met animals, never knew how they came to be. And he said, okay, let me place a mark on this place. Let me place a mark here. And next time I'm passing here, I'll try to check if this, this thing grows, this plant grows into this tree and produces the same fruits that I ate. And then probably he did that, came back, checked the tree, and saw that, wow, it's the same fruits this thing is producing. So that's how he got to know that trees grow from seeds. So it was by mere observation and practical, he got to know that trees grew from seeds. Then how did they also discover animals? They began to move from place to place, hunting animals, and they discovered that, some animals are sort of receptive to them, and it's easier to catch some animals than some other animals. Probably the chickens, obviously couldn't fly, so it would be easier for them to run after them and catch them. Or, the cows probably were not so wild and aggressive, so it wasn't so hard to get to capture the cows for them to roast and eat. So, and probably the goats also. Then he decided, okay, if we don't need to, this is how we can get these plants, why not stay in this place and plant these same things around, so that we can have them to always eat, and we don't have to always move around. Because the major reason why they had to move around was, if they stayed in a place, they didn't know how to plant, they didn't know how to rejuvenate what they were eating. After some time, what they ate the animals they hunted and the plants they ate would finish in that area, so they will always have to move. But when they discovered how they could, keep up at producing these plants, and how instead of having to always go around hunting, they could domesticate these animals, keep these animals around where they could, easily stretch and pick these animals. They decided to keep these animals and grow what they knew they always had to eat. Probably they started growing corn around, started growing groundnut, and all of that. So they began to settle. Once their food was settled, they also began to settle. They were probably still living in caves, but when food was settled, they could now have enough time. Most of their time was probably walking around, looking for the next thing to eat, looking for the next animal to capture, looking for the best plant to eat that would probably not kill them, because they couldn't eat just any plant. But once they could already settle that, they knew the plants they were growing and they knew the animals they were keeping, and they didn't spend all their time hunting or gathering plants. Then they started to think, how can we move out from these caves? Because sometimes the caves might be flooded. They started thinking about huts that they could create. They started thinking about how they could, cut down a tree and build a hut. So they started to think on how to improve their lives. And I will say again, it was after they settled their food, they began to think of other ways to improve their lives. And so, as time went on, they decided, instead of using our hands to dig the floor before we can put seeds, let's use stones to dig. It will be better that way. Then they discovered sticks could even do it much better than the stones. Then later, they saw that the stones could sharpen the sticks, and they could use that to dig the floor, the ground to plant. So they decided to start doing that. They sharpened the sticks with stones, and they were using that to plant. Now we see that this also becomes the genesis of which tools began to be created, because all they had was their hands to do things. So now they began to use tools, and probably they moved on to using hoes and cutlasses, and I think we've developed now, we're using tractors and we're using robots now in agriculture. Yeah, and so that is the beginning or the story of agriculture that I know, and I would always share anytime I have the opportunity to, because this happens to be one of the stories that really got me interested in agriculture, and I believe it already has gotten you interested, because there are many things that will be coming out from this podcast I'm sure would stimulate you to want to know more on agriculture. But here are some things I would like you to really ponder on. The early men remained wanderers until they observed. The early men remained wanderers until they took action to produce for themselves. And the early men began to think about better ways to settle when there was enough food. So just all those thoughts there in your mind. I've mentioned three things. The early men remained wanderers until they observed. The early men remained wanderers until they took action to actually produce for themselves. And it was not until they began to think they had their food issues solved before they could think about other ways to improve their lives. So we will be continuing on the next episode with these three main points. That'll be all for this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next week for the next episode. Thank you.